1980, the Mojave Desert. Human bones are discovered in a shallow grave near the small town of Ludlow, California.
There were 2 victims found in the desert near Ludlow. There was an archaeologist out there working in the desert and had found some bones that turned out to be human remains.
Police launch a vigorous investigation to identify the 2 young victims.
This was a couple that, had intention of traveling west. We always had a gut feeling that family was going to be looking for them.
I didn't want to believe that she wouldn't come back.
Investigators uncover a suspect with a monstrous history, but with no evidence, the case reaches a dead end.
I would describe anybody that can commit 5 murders, bury bodies, as a bona fide psychopath.
The victims remain Jane and John Does for decades until the killer gives investigators a small break.
So he said, I had to kill him because he would have killed me.
Here's a guy just making up a confession as he goes along when the evidence points to something entirely different.
This is the tragic story of Pamela Sally and William Lane, the evil they encounter that ends their lives, and how the Bloodline Detectives restore their identities after decades and return them to their families.
She was missing for over 40 years, and it took DNA to find her.
Investigative genetic genealogy is just groundbreaking.
Without this technology and giving us those leads, we wouldn't have found them.
November 1980, Mojave Desert, California. A hiker calls the police after finding what he believes to be human bones.
In our desert area, we have a lot of untraveled territory that people like to go hiking on. And a lot of those people are out there looking for rocks, fossils. In this case, there was a gentleman, I believe he's 65, 70 years old. He was out there doing that with his son. And they came across a partially opened up grave that was very shallow.
And had found some bones that turned out to be human remains, reported them. And our department went out, took the report.
They sent a deputy sheriff out there to verify if in fact that was a dead body, which he did. He then notified dispatch, who then notified the homicide detail, who sent 2 detectives out there to work the crime scene.
The crime scene was a shallow grave, vast desert out in the middle of nowhere, just above Ludlow, which is a very small community in San Bernardino County.
Initially, when they responded, there was remains, some bones that it looked like animals had dug up one of the shallow graves in the desert. It was sandy soil. Once they collected those bones, were able to determine that they were in fact human. Then they were able to determine that there was actually 2 grave sites.
It appeared to be a male and a female. The female had long red hair, and there weren't any clothes on them at all. There were no clothes in the actual grave, so it appeared they would have been buried naked.
At this stage, the coroner's office is contacted.
So the coroner's office was notified the following morning. They were notified by the sheriff's deputies that were already starting the investigation out near Ludlow, and they sent a deputy coroner to the scene in order to initiate the coroner investigation. It appeared from the scene that the 2 bodies were interred in the gravesite, and it was likely animal scavenging had pulled the remains from the gravesite out into the desert. They were mostly complete. They were in an advanced state of decomposition. They were partially skeletonized, but there was some hair and tissue still on the remains.
While the coroners are gathering the skeletal remains, investigators are looking for other evidence.
They would have walked the area looking for tire tracks, shoe prints, shoe impressions, any type of identification that may have been discarded by the perpetrators. That would have been their course of action there at the scene. There wasn't any clothing, so you couldn't remove a wallet or ID card or anything like to identify them since they weren't clothed. So they were John and Jane Doe.
Within that grave, they also found shell casings and projectiles to a weapon that was probably the weapon that was used to kill those two people. They were .22 caliber bullets. If they find a gun somewhere that they think might have been the one they used, they can compare the bullets they collected to test firing bullets from the gun they have, and they can say, yeah, this gun killed those two people.
Police begin their investigation and the bodies are brought back for autopsy.
When the bodies were taken to the coroner's office and autopsies performed on both bodies, all the bones are removed and actually placed on the table just as they would be in a normal human body.
The first physical examination was the following day after they were recovered. That included an external examination. At that point, the pathologist noted that both remains had significant head trauma. After that initial examination was completed, the bodies had complete x-rays taken, and a secondary exam was performed a few days later when the x-rays revealed that both bodies had evidence of possible gunshot wounds. Some projectiles were recovered from that autopsy to help the pathologist establish the cause of death. There were 3 projectiles recovered from the male remains. Those were deemed to be .22 caliber fired bullets, and those were collected as evidence as part of the initial investigation. The female remains did not have any fragments or bullets recovered, but there was evidence of gunshot wounds during their examination.
She was shot in the head, and she'd also been bludgeoned to death, probably by the shovel that was used to dig the grave.
The pathologist calls in identification specialists who are able to provide investigators with a rough physical description of the victims.
The female was described as having strawberry blonde or light brown hair, approximately 7 to 10 inches long. The male was described as having 14 to 15 inch long hair secured in a ponytail. The color was designated as brown, light brown. Those descriptors were observed in the initial investigation, and then a dental examination was completed the following day. That also helped in establishing a possible age range. The odontologist that did that examination estimated both bodies to be in their late teens. And then the forensic anthropologist was brought in, and her examination established a stature based on measurements of both femurs. The anthropologist's estimation was that the female victim was between 17 to 22 years old, and the male victim somewhere in the range of 21 to 30 years old.
Critical for investigators is establishing just how long the bodies have been in the ground.
Based on the coroner's report and the assessment, it was estimated that they had been deceased for about 1 to 6 months prior to being found. So areas of the bodies would have been exposed to the sun, and due to the animal scavenging, that would have increased the decomposition due to loss of tissue and the scattering of extremities and things like that.
Armed with the descriptions, investigators visit the small town of Ludlow to see if anyone can help identify the victims.
In the early stages of this investigation, the detectives would have been trying to identify who the victims were and who they were associated with.
The people that live there because they want to get away from normal everyday life.
Why were they there in Ludlow? Were they passing through? Ludlow is a very small community. Nobody really lives there. At the time, there was a diner and like a rest area there.
No one they speak with can ID the victims. However, investigators do receive some information. And that information points to one man.
The owner of the gas station there in Ludlow said that you need to talk to Howard Neal because Howard was always at the gas station, always knew the people that were coming through here because he made it his business to do so. So basically to either rob them or pull a scam on him or anything that's going to benefit him. That's what he was doing there. Howard Neal lived in Ludlow with his wife at the time the bodies were found.
Eager to talk to Neal, officers start searching Ludlow for him, but he appears to have vanished. Suspect Howard Neal has fled the area.
Howard had realized that the police, the homicide detectives, were looking to interview him in regards to the bodies that were found a short distance from his home. Howard and his wife quit their jobs and then left Ludlow altogether, just vanished.
Police start a nationwide search and track down the Neals a few months later in Stockton, California. Detectives discover they're not the only investigators looking for Howard Neal.
So Howard Neal is arrested on March 6, 1981 in Stockton, California for shoplifting. So they routinely run his information through the system, and bang, a hit comes up that he's wanted in Mississippi for 3 murders. His half-brother, his niece, and her cousin.
When investigators learn the details of the horrific murders in Mississippi, they are confident Neal is also responsible for the deaths of their unidentified victims in the desert.
On January 24th, 1981, Bobby Neal, Howard Neal's half-brother, along with his daughter, Amanda Joy, 13, went to go collect her cousin, Melanie Sue Polk, so she could spend the night and they could go to church the next morning. The last time they were seen was in Langston at 10 o'clock on Saturday night, January 24, 1981. So when 12-year-old Melanie Sue's mother realized she hadn't come home, she was concerned. What's going on? So she went over to Bobby Neal's house to see if she could find out where her daughter was. And what she found was Bobby Neal's truck parked in the driveway. And then she went into the house, let herself in, and she found the house fine. There was no struggle, but nobody was there. The only thing that concerned her was that Bobby Neal's glasses, which he wore all the time, he needed them, were on the table. She becomes quite alarmed by this because the glasses are so important to him. So she calls the Lawrence County Sheriff's Department and reports Bobby Neal, her daughter, and the cousin missing. And they begin a search. And for the next 10 days, they find nothing. No sign of them anywhere.
Then on February the 6th, the dreaded news comes through that the body of a young girl has been discovered.
So this man, on his way to a fishing hole, discovers Amanda Joy's body. There was clearly evidence she was strangled. There was evidence she was beaten among the face and upper body. She was shot with a shotgun in the abdomen. It's clear that somebody brutalized this young child and left her on the side of the road.
And it isn't long before another body is found.
Melanie Sue Polk was found about 900 yards away from her cousin. And it was clear from that crime scene, from the forensic examination, that she had been shot as well.
With the community reeling from the murders of the 2 children, the search continues for Bobby Neal.
About a month after the girls were found, Bobby Neal was found several miles away. He was shot and he was bound.
Police arrest Howard Neal and question him about the murders in Mississippi.
So after being interrogated, he decides he's going to tell Stockton police exactly what happened out there in Mississippi with his half-brother, his niece, and her cousin. So Howard Neal says he went over to his half-brother Bobby's house, and the 2 girls were there. And that under their own free will, they decided with him and Bobby, they were all gonna go for a ride. And that the two girls sat in the front and Bobby sat in the back, and out they went. He claims that Bobby got upset with him because he had his hand on one of the girls' thigh, and he demanded to stop the car. So we did. They get out, and Howard says he brought his gun with him. And they start walking away from the car, and that he shot Bobby. When Amanda Joy was found, there was evidence on her wrists that she had been bound and restrained. But now, in his confession, Howard Neal says, I never did that. When Howard gets back to the car, the girls immediately ask him, what was that shot about? He shot the gun in the air, and that Bobby decided he was going to walk home. And Howard claims the girls believed him.
At this stage, in a further act of complete depravity, Howard Neal tells investigators that the girls were willing participants in his brutal sexual assault of them.
Howard Neal tries to make police believe that these 12, 13-year-old girls willingly had sex with him, that they wanted it. He claims that he had sex with Melanie Sue Polk and then Amanda Second, and that the girls liked it and they wanted it, when all the evidence points to rape, that he bound them and that he raped them and then he killed them. He says he shot Amanda, what he believed was in the chest, and that when he shot her, Melanie Sue started screaming, so he pointed the gun at her and shot her. He said when he was finished with the triple murder, he went back to his family, picked them up, and then drove back to Texas.
Howard Neal is tried and found guilty of the murders in Mississippi.
Howard Neal is currently serving 3 life sentences in Mississippi for the triple murder of his brother, his niece, and his niece's best friend. He raped and killed those 2 little girls. He was convicted of that in Mississippi, given the death penalty.
He was mentally incompetent. So he was tested and found that he was mentally retarded. Those were the words that were used and used in court. It's in the court transcripts. Basically, he had no education. He doesn't remember going to school. He was abused as a child. Based on that, his lack of intelligence, they reduced his crimes to 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole.
San Bernardino investigators are eager to interview Neal about their double homicide, but he refuses to speak with them, so they decide to track down his wife.
Ludlow detectives were hell-bent on the fact that Howard Neal killed those 2 people that they found buried. So they kept pestering him and pestering the court to question him, but his lawyers fought it off.
They interviewed Howard Neal's wife, Darla. Darla also worked as a dishwasher at the coffee shop in Ludlow at the time where the bodies were found. Darla had indicated that Howard, her husband, may have been responsible for hitchhikers that were passing through Ludlow. She also had said that Howard drove her by the gravesite and showed her where they were buried.
With Howard Neal behind bars for the rest of his life and unwilling to speak, detectives try other investigative methods to identify the victims, who are still John and Jane Doe.
After the initial investigation, if they didn't have any good leads to who these victims might possibly be, in this case, within a few weeks, they started amassing these descriptors, and they submitted the case to the Department of Justice and entered the cases into the Missing and Unidentified Person System, which we refer to as MUPS. That listing in MUPS would indicate that the male and female were found with their identifying descriptors, as much information as possible, including their age estimation, possible stature, the dental information from the dentist's examination. And then that record would be searchable against any missing persons that is entered into that system nationwide. After the case was entered into MUPS, over the course of years, there were a number of exclusions based on circumstances, stature, dental comparisons to other missing persons.
The case is running cold. There are no new leads even after eliminating other missing person cases. And in 1980, DNA is not a viable option.
After the autopsy, because the remains were not identified, they stayed in-house for a couple of years. In 1983, they filed a petition with the courts to file their death certificates, and they were buried intact in the county cemetery. At that time, someone in the office deemed it necessary to retain their skulls as evidence of the investigation and to assist with ongoing identification work. And those skulls were retained in curation here at the coroner's office. So because of that, we had access to them to do these additional types of searches. We try everything. We do isotope testing. We compare cases using GIS mapping. We use many out-of-the-box techniques in order to try and identify folks when even the DNA does not give us our immediate answers through the DOJ system.
Advances in genetic technology means it becomes possible to undertake DNA testing on the skulls.
The bones initially were sent for DNA, and they were able to get an extraction to establish that profile in CODIS. But CODIS only uses anywhere from 13 to 20 loci to store into their database. The CODIS submission was initially in 2006. The other investigators that have been assigned to essentially what we deem is the missing and unidentified persons section here at the Coroner's Division are continually working to make sure that those samples are complete. Additional samples were sent in 2010 to help establish a more clear profile for CODIS. And at that time, that was when we were able to make sure that they had a full CODIS profile. But there were no hits because there was no exemplars or family samples in the system to compare to. With the advent of using genealogy as a tool for identification, we need a complete genomic profile, and that is when we sent the skulls to a couple of laboratories in order to get that full DNA profile.
In spite of all their efforts, the victims remain unidentified. In 2017, San Bernardino investigators Gerrit Tesselaar and Steve Shumway finally received permission to talk to Howard Neal.
Tesselaar and I went in to interview him, and we introduced ourselves. He was 64 at the time we interviewed him. He was willing to chat. He was very thankful, actually, somebody came to talk to him. So we explained why we were there and what our purpose was, and if he knew anything about the victims, that he spent time with them, where they were from, their names, anything that he could remember. Now, granted, this is 2017. You're talking 37 years later. His memory is probably, you never know, but we had to try.
Well, the sole purpose of going to interview Howard Neal was to get him to tell us who he thought those two dead people were. Now, in order to do that, we had to come up with what's called a use immunity agreement. In other words, the DA's office draws up paperwork that says, you can go talk to him, whatever he tells you, you can't use it against him.
First, he denied it, of course. He denied it, and then he admitted to meeting them, and then that they needed a place to stay. They were hitchhiking across the country.
He made mention in the interview that he thought this girl was pretty. Well, that kind of set off a little light bulb.
Based on his MO and what motivated him back in the past, I think that he was attracted to that female.
Neal starts opening up to investigators.
He picked him up. They go back to his house, and he mentions to Steve and I that he was trying to put the move on her.
The male victim had gotten really upset.
We asked him, well, why did you kill him? If I didn't kill him, he would have killed me. Because that guy was so upset about the fact that he was trying to put the move on the girl that he was with. So he said, I had to kill him because he would have killed me. He killed him first, shot him, and then had her help him put the male's body in the station wagon, transported that male victim to this area where they were buried, had her help dig the grave.
I believe that she was pleading with Howard to don't kill me because I have a small daughter.
And then he killed her and put her in the grave too.
There is no doubt in the investigators' minds that the murders were premeditated and that Howard Neal is a determined and ruthless killer.
Howard definitely was in full control, knew exactly what he was doing, had planned what he was going to do, had planned the location he was going to put them in, because there's nobody around to see you or to hear gunshots. Howard did not show any remorse at all. He's actually one of those guys, he's just dead inside. He killed 5 people that we know of.
But the immunity deal made in advance of the interview with Neal is a problem.
It really didn't help our case in a court of law. When you have an immunity agreement like that, it's usually, whatever you tell the cops, we won't use it against you. So we never got charges filed against him, even though he admitted to us that he had killed those 2 people. And we probably never will.
They won't be able to hold Howard Neal accountable for the murders, but investigators glean important information from the interview.
When he said they had a daughter, and it stuck with Howard, she pleaded for her life, saying, please, I have a young daughter. She knew what the inevitable was going to happen. That's why I believe there was going to be a daughter, family members, searching for their mom.
The search is now on with the limited information they have and the possibility of a DNA match down the line.
In this case, all we had were victims. We knew who the suspect was, but we didn't know who the victims were.
There was DNA uploaded into CODIS and there was no matches. So I talked to coroner's office and verified we have bone available, but it was very difficult extracting DNA for the SNP profile because they had been exposed to sunlight, they'd been out in the desert for maybe 8 months or more, and it really degrades the DNA. In 2019, I was reviewing cases for the use of genetic genealogy for identification. And reviewing this case with the Ludlow victims, it looked like we did have bone available. The CODIS profile is called an STR profile, and think of it as a very basic profile of DNA, minimal amount of information. But it works very well for CODIS, for direct matches and immediate family matches. When you use genetic genealogy, you need what's called a SNP profile, which is a lot more information, and you can match up to distant cousins.
The forensic process is very complex.
Especially on bone, you have to go to whole sequencing, whole genome sequencing, and then they pull the SNP profile that you need out of that whole sequence that can be uploaded into GEDmatch or family tree DNA. And then you look at your matches and how close or how distant. And it depends on the amount of sonomorgans matching as to how close or how distant the matches are. So once you have so many matches, you have to take those people, build their family tree up, and eventually they all intersect and you get to what's called the most recent common ancestor. So now you know that your victim is a descendant of those most recent common ancestors. So then you have to take those people and build their trees all the way down.
It's a very detailed and time-consuming job.
And then you just have to call up people within those family lines and ask them to do what we call a target test, where you get their DNA and compare it to your victim. And if you're in the right line, the match gets bigger and bigger, and you can narrow it down till you can finally identify their victim. And in some cases, it can take a year or more.
The detectives agree on a plan to ID the victims.
We had gotten both victims extracted, and again, because of the suspect saying He talked to him for a while, and the female victim said she had a daughter she left at home with family. We decided to try her first. So we had her sequenced first and uploaded to GEDmatch. When it's uploaded in there, it takes a while for the matches to populate, so you just have to keep going back and checking.
Then a breakthrough.
Then it popped up. We've got a match, a parent-child match. And this has to be her daughter. Her daughter is looking for her. We can tell her what happened to her mom now.
We were ecstatic to hear the news that there was a close match and that we finally had a lead to identify this couple. It was really, really a great thing because we knew that using this technique was going to lead us to this family.
When investigators get their potential match, it's not what they are expecting. It's not the match they thought it would be.
We pulled the profile and found out it was a private eye that actually uploaded it into GEDmatch.
When I contacted her, she told me that Christine Sally was her client and was trying to find her mother. And she had uploaded Christine's DNA into Ancestry and then transferred it into GEDmatch, and she gave me Christine's information.
Out of the blue, Christine Sally receives the phone call.
So I was at work one day and I got a call. It says San Bernardino on it. And you know, nowadays with all the robocalls, you don't want to answer all these unknown calls. So I let it go to voicemail and they left me a voicemail, and it was Detective Headley from the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department. So I did call him back. I at the moment, knew what it probably was, because who from California and the Sheriff's Department is just gonna call me randomly? He answered and he was kind of confused, still in figuring things out. He told me that there had been a DNA match on GEDmatch and that he believed it was my mother and that he didn't have a lot of information. He didn't even have a name to give me. And that's when I told him that I had a name to give him.
Christine is able to disclose that the name San Bernardino investigators are looking for is Pamela Sally, her mother. Christine is able to tell police more about her life and her family.
I was born on September 17th, 1979 in Fort Myers, Florida, to Pamela Diane Duffy. My parents divorced on December 17th of 1980. Sometime after that, my mother took me and started traveling. She was traveling north. She was with a couple of guys. One of them was Digger Lane. At that point, they were struggling to keep me clothed and other things like that. They ended up staying in the back room of a pool hall, and something happened with Digger Lane, and he ended up getting arrested at some point. And that's when social services started to intervene, thinking that a child had been neglected. And I was taken into foster care at that time.
Pamela Sally then moves state.
At some point, my grandmother brought her from Mobile back over to Florida. But unfortunately, when Pam had left the state of Florida with me in December, she was on probation at the time. So she ended up absconding from probation. So when she had went back to Florida, they had arrested her for leaving the state. Then in June of 1980, she was released and she signed her rights to me away. And that's when she told my grandparents she was gonna go travel with her friend, Digger Lane, across the country, and they were gonna go hitchhiking across the country. And that was the last time anyone really talked to her. I do believe she did call my grandparents a few times while she was out on the road, but after a while, the phone calls did stop.
At this point, the family loses track of Pamela Sally and her companion, Digger Lane.
Back then, it wasn't too uncommon to go hitchhiking and traveling across the country.
Now, they had left voluntarily, so there was no missing persons report taken. There was no foul play indicated or anything at that time, so the police would not have taken a missing person even later if someone approached them saying, hey, I haven't heard from my mom. And keep in mind, back in that time, There's no social media, there's no cell phones, so stay in touch with someone, it just didn't happen that way like you would today.
The challenge now is to definitively match the DNA in a formal way, and to prove that Pamela Sally has been murdered in the desert.
Once you identify someone through genetic genealogy, you still need to obtain a CODIS profile from an immediate family member to get the legal identification.
After the original first match came, and then I got in contact with San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department. Later, we did an official DNA swab where the state troopers came out and did the whole mouth swab thing for their official CODIS database.
With the female victim finally identified as Pamela Sally, investigators now need to identify her companion, Digger Lane.
In talking to Christine, we learned that her mother left with a male known as Digger Lane, and he had recently been in custody in Virginia, and that's all the information that we had at that point. So we contacted the local law enforcement back there to review their records, and they were able to come up with the name William Lane as a probable match. Once we identified a possible victim as William Lane, we were able to determine that he was also missing out of Florida, and his family had not seen him since 1980 also.
Technology back in the 80s, it certainly isn't what it is now with social media. All the different platforms that we have to communicate with each other. So it was very different then, and they just thought that he had gone on a trip and just started a new life elsewhere.
Now the culmination of the investigation. Investigators return the remains to their loved ones.
Once we had the legal identification for both of the victims, then we worked with our DA's office and our coroner's office to obtain all the remains from both victims and return them to the families.
Our district attorney, Jason Anderson, thought it was important that we return the remains to the family members. We made all the arrangements to travel back east and connected with the families and made sure that they were delivered in the appropriate manner, which was in person.
We were in contact with the airlines to see if there's any special circumstances or rules in place in transporting them on a plane and so forth. We had to obviously tell security and TSA that we had them, and they just had to run them through the scanning machine and make sure there wasn't anything concerning that showed up on the scan. We took them out in a suitcase and made sure they were with us at all times and kept safe to the best of our ability being on an airplane. We flew them out. We were in Virginia first, returned that one. That was Pamela Sally. We returned to her daughter.
They came out all the way from California to deliver the ashes, and it meant so much to me to have someone personal come out and actually give their condolences and sympathies and actually be with me as I was accepting those ashes.
Then we continued from Virginia to Florida, where we returned the remains of William Everett Lane to his mother, Sandra Blair.
It was a very emotional time for her. You can tell she was really heartbroken, not knowing what had happened to her son and then learning that he had been murdered. And so for her to receive the remains, she was really appreciative of that and talked about her son and the relationship that they had and really felt that she would be at peace now that he's home.
She was looking forward to shaking the hand and meeting Teslar, who wasn't able to be part of this experience in returning them. She was just wanted to make sure that him and both Steve Shumway as well knew how grateful she was for the work that they had done in this case. She understood the time and the effort that they put into it to get to this point, and she was just extremely thankful.
Investigators witness the meaning of closure for the families now that this double murder has finally been solved.
I think deep down I always knew that she had probably passed because I didn't want to believe that she wouldn't come back. So I think I always knew that she was gone. Of course, you always have that little bit of hope that you're wrong and that she maybe is in Europe or, you know, anything else. But yeah, I always had that little bit of hope that she would always come back. But I think deep down I always knew that she really was gone because I knew she wouldn't be gone for this long if it was on her terms. I was hoping that I would get a little closure, and I'm still hoping that's gonna come. But right now, I'm still mourning the loss of the little hope that I had. That small little bit of hope is now gone, and I think that's what I've been mourning. But I do feel that closure will come soon. But right now, I can't stop thinking about her last moments and how she died. It hurts so bad to know those were her last moments. But I'm sure closure will come soon. It'll come soon.
After 40 years of searching for answers, the Bloodline Detectives think about the importance of genetic genealogy to this case.
Investigative genetic genealogy is just groundbreaking. Without it, there would be so many cases that have been solved, both unidentified suspects and victims, that would never have been possible.
Because the families themselves had not necessarily filed them as missing persons, and not wrongly, you know, both were grown adults that left on their own volition and, you know, were going to make a life for themselves. It doesn't necessarily warrant that the family would file them missing. So without this technology and giving us those leads, we wouldn't have found them.
Investigators are constantly looking into cases and files to try to find something that either hadn't been done or maybe could be done again, as far as forensically looking at new evidence or having evidence retested. I guess I could say to family members who are involved with cold cases, just know that they're never being just on a shelf. People are always trying to look into ways to reopen them and find new information and get them solved.
We have a sign that we keep in the cold case unit. It says, never, never, never give up. We weren't going to give up. It meant the world to me. It's the most fulfilling case that I've ever worked in my career. And I've total law enforcement time, I have like 41 years. And it definitely is the most fulfilling case I've ever worked.
You go to almost, you know, to war with them, you know, with these cases. And sometimes you're successful, sometimes you're not.
The detectives were great. They never gave up. Even after 40 years, they continued to search and use new tools like the genealogy to finally bring closure to a cold case.